Francis West, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about having you. I think you bring a unique perspective. And why don't we start by talking a little bit about your what you do, how you got to do that, and what you're up to now.
Okay, sure. So now I'm a founder of my advisory services company, Francis West Co. Is a company that's really aimed at helping organizations, all the way from government to business, nonprofit to startups, to do what I call operationalized inclusion. I spent my entire career in the technology business in big companies, and personally, I really benefited from a workplace environment that's inclusive. So as we are in the world, the topic of inclusion or diversity is becoming so popular, I really want to bring a different kind of point of view to the marketplace, especially in business and also policymakers' mind, that underpinning a lot of these diversity inclusion discussion, there's an important element or underpinning, which is technology. So I do a lot of advisory services globally with different, like I said, organizations. But I also recently wrote a book called Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. And then begin to do keynote speakings on this topic.
That's great. So now I understand that you, for a while, you were in charge of accessibility for IBM.
Yes, I was IBM's first chief accessibility officer. It was quite an honor to have that job, and I had the responsibility of overseeing the IBM internal accessibility effort. And one of the most, I think, special thing about that job was that my organization was actually situated inside IBM Research, which is very different from, I think it's still the first or only company that put the accessibility team inside research versus product development or HR or even legal. I think it really speaks to the company's, understanding that technology can enable diversity or inclusion, and that is really a source of innovation. And that, by the way, has, like I mentioned in my book, is about, and it's been the the foundational kind of a principle that I believe, that is, our differences actually help to create a very creative and sometimes disruptive thinking, which actually result in a very special innovation.
Well, it's a really important point, looking at whether the area around accessibility and inclusivity is in the legal HR realm or if it's in the more mainline business. So the question is, if you have an enterprise that's focused on being accessible, is it because you have to and you want to make sure it's a compliance issue, or is it because you want more customers? I know we were connected through my brother who started the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And, that's near and dear to my heart. The reason that he started it from his perspective, he, along with Jennison, his partner in crime, was in helping my dad. As my dad got older, even though he was in his 80s, he was very computer literate, and he would do his online banking. And he was frustrated where, as my dad's eyesight got worse or his hearing got worse, he just wasn't able to use the tools every day and just normal paying his bills, finding out how much he's got, how much he owes on a particular bill, the nightmares that he would have just interacting in regular business. It was very frustrating to him. And, we would take turns. We were kind of the computer support for my dad. And I remember one time I looked at my dad's settings. I'm like, what, I'm calling up my brother. Why did you turn all this background yellow? And he's like, oh no, daddy needs that for contrast. and
Mm-hmm.
the way that they changed the website or what have you made it very inaccessible, and that's what started them off on that path. But like what I'm really interested in is to see, like for example, you and I are using Zoom, and the whole world is using Zoom. So if you want to know about the accessibility, on the one level, Zoom needs to worry about how are they complying with the law. But if you're someone who has accessibility challenges and whatever they look like, whether you can get this conference to go, whether you can participate in the conference the same way as anyone else would, that's what's really important. And from your perspective as a consultant, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think this is actually the kind of the foundational question. Like, I mean, nowadays, I mean, in the old days, when I first joined IBM, I mean, technology or computer is called mainframe, right? It sits in the background, actually in the data center somewhere. Nobody really know where it is, and for average person or citizen or consumer, or I mean, you don't even know where the computer is at, right? I mean, the distance between the technology and individuals is quite vast, and usually it's only company will tap into the compute power to automate tasks, to drive efficiency or speed. Well, fast forward, in many ways, I think, IBM's personal computer kind of started out, taking the technology from the back office to back room data center to the person, right? Therefore, it's called PC, personal computer. And of course, a company like Apple really took the next, exponential step and put it in everybody's hand and in the pocketbook. So now when we talk about technology, it's really about that technology enable the person, to do everything, right? I mean, again, going back to the old days, you only do certain tasks, with computers, but now you do everything with a computer. So from that standpoint, the whole technology is what I call has become a technology that we have to think human first. And if you think human first, then that means you really should not just empathize, but you really have to live the experience and the person, have, and then design your user interface or design the whole experience based on that person's needs and wants. So things like Zoom, which becoming an everyday necessity, because in the COVID-19 world today, I mean, everybody telework. So if you, for example, design your panel at the bottom, right, when your mouse hover over it, it comes up. If the contrast is not strong enough, you have low vision, you may be prevented accidentally from being able to, figure out what's going on. Or if you don't have, voice enabled, technology associated with all these control, virtual control, then the blind person won't be able to use. So all these are a foundational kind of design thinking that for a progressive company who really not think of inclusion just as a, kind of have to do, but view it as a differentiated a core value, then you're going to design the whole experience from the very, very beginning very differently.
Yeah, well, one of the points is like my dad's situation or my mom's situation. There's going to be someone you love that's impacted by it, but from just a purely capitalistic, selfish perspective, I want all the customers I can get, and if I serve all the customers, in a lot of cases, it's just as easy to be accessible as not. It just requires forethought, and if you could actually think through, okay, you know what does my product need to do to be accessible by everybody, then if if you can have more customers, why not do that? So what are some of the things you advise your clients to do? Is there a mindset? Is there a checklist? What are some of the where does, if someone makes the commitment that they want to be accessible, where do they start?
Well, it's funny you mentioned checklists. I went from a person that, in my day job as IBM executive responsible for accessibility, from creating a lot of checklists, making sure that we have process in place, to all the way to the other side. And now I really believe that it is a different way of thinking. And frankly, it starts from the very top. Usually is this, the C-suites, and even more specifically, it's the CEO and the board, right? Because any institution or any company, the vision or the priorities set by the individual, that's at the quote unquote at the very top. So I think that earlier you mentioned there is an accessibility or compliance play or the innovation play. I mean, that decision is made at the very beginning by that CEO or by the board. And you can have checklists. We can always come up with checklists. But fundamentally, do you believe that this is actually, like you mentioned, a differentiated play? Is this a quote unquote a white space or the green field opportunities by being able to reach, all population, all segment of the market, or you're just trying to prevent from being sued and all that? So this is, to some extent, it's almost become a philosophical or existential question for our business. And by the way, I feel like the business has to rethink their model anyway, especially like a situation like COVID-19 today has brought out some of the shortcomings of our current political system, economic system, healthcare system, and even technology, system. So, so I'm a big believer that you have to think differently, and then you will act differently.
Yeah. So what lessons can we learn out of coping with COVID that help us think accessibly?
Well, the COVID actually overnight point to the, that if you want to work and somehow your ability is restricted, in this case, social distancing is a policy that's put in place, prevent us from going to work. So you could be, so you're now in the same situation as a person, let's say, with a mobility challenge that cannot, go to a workplace, but had to stay at home. But everybody became very innovative, right? I mean, started using tools like Zoom because they have to do it. So I would say the parallel is that people with disability, varying disability, or in general, people who are underserved population, they're constantly facing barriers to work. The actual act of work, now we have to do remote telecommuting or telework. That actually has been one of the biggest accommodation requirement has been, requested by a lot. But if you the HR policy before COVID-19, many companies will say, no, you have to come to work. Our job requires you be on site, because that's the only way we can collaborate. I think in a lot of Silicon Valleys, require you absolutely to be there. I think Yahoo is specifically was one of those companies that if you cannot show up, then you cannot innovate. I think COVID-19 proved that you can innovate. You actually can be very creative online. In some cases, I would even say that you could be even more innovative in collaborating with your peers.
Well, having spent some time in corporate America as you did, I think it really does come down to company culture and company philosophy. If you work at the kind of place where it's more results oriented and collaborative oriented, then there's not as much of a need for you to physically be there as long as you really are collaborating. There are other places where if you're out of sight, out of mind, it's not about the productivity, but you need to be in the office. I worked at one place, and this is especially true for contractors and consultants. There's an idea where if you're not on site, we don't really know that we're getting our money's worth. Have you used the breakout features in Zoom?
No, I have not, but I've heard about it, and I'm actually looking forward to experience that for the first time in my next in my Zoom call in a couple weeks.
So I in some of the things that I do, last night I led a large class, and it was all on Zoom. Normally it would be in person, but in this case it was on Zoom. And we had some practical lab activity that we worked on.
Mm-hmm.
So I created 5 breakout rooms, and I had one room for, let's say, people who are more beginner in the skill, and I had an advanced room, and then I had a
Mm-hmm.
couple of like in between. And so there were leaders on each of the rooms, and they were leading the conversation. Like I led the large conversation, kicked off the smaller conversations, and then it was a little bit clunky, but I went room to room, checking in how they were doing, how did they have any questions, and what are the learnings they were getting. And then we had the breakout rooms end, and we went back to our larger meeting. I can imagine departments working that way, where you kind of a larger department space, you go into breakout rooms and you have your specific meetings, and like people on your team can pop in on those meeting rooms, and it
Mm-hmm.
becomes very similar to virtual. So going back to the earlier point you were making, if you want to create an accessibility type space, even if you have say 75% of your workforce is on site, you can have the 25% if you now build it that way and you think that way. And it never occurred to me
Exactly.
to do that, right? So I think that's what you're evangelizing for, yes?
Yeah, I mean that's part of the thinking. Then every company, large or small, is talking about talent acquisition is very important, and talent retention, um, and and the incremental costs, especially with the technologists, is always going down. The incremental cost of putting like Zoom is free even, so there's really no reason at a kind of company level to kind of from day one to have this kind of holistic thinking to say, okay, I'm going to have a company that is going to be enabling everybody's participation. And then once you set up these kind of a virtual and using technology set up, whether it's a virtual breakout rooms and whatever, or for example, when we're doing a video conferencing, there is now technology to do real time. One of the things that we worked on in IBM research back then, and then we all know the speech reco is continued to be one of the fastest growing and the most fascinating space. It went from command driven speech, speech to text to continuous speech. You can imagine that as we talk, they will have automatic transcription. And then so for those of us who are beginning to have a hearing problem or a lot of ambience noise in the background because we're working from home, you can see what you're saying. Just think about the productivity. And then once you do that, and you also help non-native language speakers, right, to gain a better comprehension of what's being discussed. And the best part of that is, and let's say you recorded that later on, it's because the conversation has been digitized. Let me search for that segment. So the derivative benefit of design a inclusive workplace environment using technology is going to be huge. It is huge. I just don't think a lot of the leaders recognize that, and that by having forethought and by leveraging technology, then it can be a very, very productive proposition.
So I want this this information to be accessible. And so I've been struggling with the different tools on YouTube and different tools. Like I want to transcribe as much as possible all of these. And what I've discovered is that the automatic closed captioning is much better than nothing, but it's not terrific. And so one of the things we really need is just better generic tools to be able to make things accessible. Are you aware of efforts going on in that area? You have anything
Oh
to?
yeah, I think I think on the YouTube, Microsoft, Google, they're all working on kind of automatic captioning. I mean, it's it's part of the machine generated transcription. It's to some degree you can say it's a kind of artificial intelligence AI. So the more people feed into that database, over time the quality will improve. And I think, until we get to that place where the quality is 99%. I mean, there are hybrid model, there are companies, and even offshore, a lot of a captioning. Let's say you created a not so perfect, transcription. I mean, there are offshore companies can do the final editing or changes for very low cost. I'm sure if you go to like one of those Fiverr, website, I mean, the apps, these are freelance captioners that can help, incrementally help you to get to that 100% very easily. I mean, that's the beauty of gig economy, right? You can basically find anybody to do the polishing, final finishing.
So for what I understand, you're saying you basically take what Google or Microsoft gives you as the base, and then you get a gig to just go through and go, oh, these are the common errors they make. Oh, just watching I'm going to fix it. And it's not as much work because they don't have to do the entire thing. They're starting with a base.
No. It's they break it down by time, so you just type it over. It's actually, the editing is not that hard. But like I said, if you don't feel like doing it because you have too much, there definitely are people out there that can, for cost versus delivery wise, it's actually very reasonable.
Right. Well, I mean, in spite of the fact that, this is that I personally am interested in our audience, if someone's interested in having something accessible, it's important to know what tools they can use. Because my theory is a lot of people would do it if they understood how. And much of the issue is people just paying attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the reason we're doing this podcast, right? Is to get the message out and let people know that there are tools out there, not just rules, not just, because my team used to say to me, tools, not rules. It's like, okay, I got it. So
yeah, I like that. Tools, not rules. So
exactly.
Can you tell us some more of the themes of your book? What is your message?
Well, the theme of the book is actually written, like I mentioned, for a C-suite and the board, because I felt quite strongly that while there is a very strong movement, to move diversity inclusion into the front and center of discussion, but has not been positioned as a business imperative. In many cases, the people who carry this kind of message, whether it's corporate America or even in startup, it's usually initiated by the HR community. I mean, HR community have done a tremendous job in, making sure the executive team and the business team, understand the value. And I think most of the CEO, understand that, HR with talent, it's important. But they never made the connection that inclusion actually, at least when we talk about inclusion going forward, to have a diverse workforce, it actually is contingent upon a good technology infrastructure, workplace technology, right? So I'm trying to bridge that kind of a thinking from a parallel thinking. Oh, I need to go to HR to think about talent acquisition. I go to my CTO or CIO to figure out what my next, workplace technology, whether it's Slack, whether it's, Microsoft 360, whatever. But these two are never thought in totality, So I really want to raise that the technology actually is very important as underpinning of any kind of inclusion discussions. And then I also want to really stress that it's not going to be a option because the changing demographics, for example, the aging population, as all of us age, it's not just about, I always have a phrase, it's not about them, it's about all of us, right? Because you and I want to continue to work. All of a sudden, color contrast or font size matters, right? These are foundational accessibility design, and my hearing is not great, so having captioning really helps. So you got demographics, you got also the, of course, some of the legislation globally, right? Thanks to the 2006 UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, I think the whole area of disability and accessibility is similar to the climate movement, right? In year 2000, when the Paris Accord and also the Kyoto Treaty of the Environment, when it first came out with the sponsorship of UN, everybody just like, oh, yeah, whatever, right? But then people begin to see the impact, and you begin to have business models like carbon trading coming in. And I think this is a similar kind of trajectory that we're on, you know, because when it comes down to it, on this planet Earth, there's only two things that really matters. One is the environment, one is people. And accessibility is fundamentally about people's participation in the society, you know, in the workplace. So I think this is a bigger idea but they're translated into business benefit that I really want the executives, you know, to think about. And last but not the least is that, going back to the point I made earlier, is that I even though I'm a technologist, I spent my entire life in technology, I actually have a little bit of concern that sometimes the technologists will invent for technology's sake, you know, versus for human's sake. So I keep wanting to put out this challenge that you have to think human first, and you have to design in the human experience, even the cultural nuances. All these are part of the bigger, you know, accessibility kind of mantra. So if you embrace that and implement it into even your concept stage or your solution, whether you're in a big company or a startup, then you actually can align your profit with your purpose and also with your principle.
Oh, that's really great. So I want to shift gears a little bit. As a successful person that's accomplished as much as you have, what are some of the things, some of the strategies that you're using to succeed in that got you where you are, and how are you applying it to the time of COVID? And is there any lessons you've learned that you can apply right now that our audience can learn from?
Well, I would just, I mean, as you probably can imagine, as a female Asian, first generation, non-English speaking person working in a highly competitive tech industry, probably had a few challenges along the way. The thing that always kept me going is that a lot of times people say don't put the blinders on. I actually do put the blinders on. It's like maybe it's just a self preservation when things are tough, like what we are doing today. I mean, dealing today in the COVID-19 environment. I literally try to only limit exposure, like watching news only certain hours. I just block it out. And because I can only control what I can control. So I just focus on what I can do, what I like to do, what I want to do, right? And so don't let the environment, you know, really get you all worked up, because that can be extremely distracting. And the second thing is that, is actually has always been my belief that you need to have a kind of a true north, know who you are and what you want. And that in my case, I really wanted to be able to bring impact, you know, in the business world, in the technology sector, to show that a woman with my background and experience can make it. So even when things are tough, if this is your true north, then somehow the challenges is not as bad, because you just know that it's good. It comes with the territory. So that somehow immunized me against some of the pain and suffering, so to speak. And so, in other words, keep your knowing yourself, and then keep your future focus on the future. Because there will be a day when the COVID-19 will fade into the background. So don't waste your energy, you know, thinking about, worrying about what's in front of you that you don't have a control over.
I think that's a really useful framework. Having your true north and using the navigation metaphor to make sure you're getting closer and closer. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have, do you take that further? Do you keep track of, let's say, what is your true north for this year? Like maybe some goals around your book, and do you take a look each day or each week, how far along you've come and adjust course?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. When I was in the corporate America, your you have your true north, but you are really your task to achieve what the corporation's objectives, making quota, and this and that, right? And now I have my own company, and what I found is that it is just as important to set that annual goal. So for example, you know 2 years ago it was about, okay, I'm going to write a book, right? So that became the goal. And then last year was like, okay, now I am going to let people know there is a book, right? So I went to CES, and I was very fortunate to get invited to South by Southwest. So that was my goal. So now coming into this year, it was like, okay, now in the book there are ideas, but now I really want to operationalize the idea, and really get to the places I have always wanted to go to. So for example, very specifically, in the enterprise world, in the corporate world, I think this topic needs to be brought upon and be viewed as a critical IT topic, just like privacy and security. So one of my goals is that I want to be able to discuss accessibility as what I call the trilogy: privacy, security, and accessibility in, for example, CIO forum, right? Because that's when the CIO, the CTO, who are making the technology decision for, let's say, big companies like JP Morgan Chase or VS. And then on the startup camp, by the way, that's where I kind of try to spend my time, partially with guys or institutions like companies or organization like UN or whatever. The other part is with the startups. To me, one of the goals is I want to be able to sit across from VCs, venture capitalists, who are feeding the growth engine of the economy, who are creating the next generation of company like IBM, like Google, like Microsoft. And I want to be able to discuss with them, unicorn discussion or a prioritization of where the money goes and whatever. Just like, there's a lot of focus on, minority investment in giving VC dollars or funding women startups. Then this topic should be part of that. So building accessibility into the startup ecosystem in a systematic way is becoming my next kind of true north goal. It's going to take a lot of effort to get there, but I definitely have my goal.
So let me ask you, given that this audience is all about being successful and just taking a look at COVID as a challenge, what is it you want to leave our audience with? What's the message?
I think COVID-19, is one of those seismic, global moment where it came I think it actually came at the right time for all of us to pause, because everybody was doing so well. We knew the employment rate was so low, the economy was growing, but we also begin to, when you have an economy that's going so well, people are beginning to ask some of the harder questions. Is there equality, right? Is there, barriers for others? So I think there is beginning to have that awareness. I think COVID-19 helped all of us to sit back and really take stock of what we have accomplished as a society, but then also really not just reflect upon some of the issues, the fundamental issue that the old policy or system may not be working, and then afford us actually, frankly, a brand new opportunity to start over again, right? Because we know, for example, this globalization, not that globalization is not good, but, outsourcing everything, and then with the just-in-time manufacturing where there's no inventory on hand because everybody wants to drive the margin to the max, right? But then when you have a crisis like this, what do? I think it's a perfect opportunity for all of us to think about within our sphere, what will be the next disruptive and new idea that needs to be introduced, and then begin to and figure out a path of getting your thoughts and getting your idea, to that point.
If a CEO is watching and they want some help and accessibility, how do they reach you and get what you're after?
Okay, well, my website is www.franciswest.co, not .com. And I think LinkedIn, my name, Francis West, is probably the place where I hang out the most. Twitter handle is fwest34. And my book is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. And if you live in the Boston area, you can also go to Harvard Coop to get a physical copy of my book. I was actually very honored that Harvard Coop carries my book, in the bookstore. So those are different ways to contact me or read my book.
That's beautiful, and we'll put the links to you in the show notes as well.
Okay, great.
So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and look forward to having you back in the future.
Well, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and you made it very easy to have this chat this afternoon.
All right, awesome. Thank you.